Want to dance with me? ¡Olé! Buenos días. I think that was quite a start for the conference there. So I'd like to thank the Mariachi brand for starting the conference in such a great way. Thank you very much.
Ay, no llores, porque cantando se alegra, cielito lindo, los corazones.
Good morning. They were actually for the wedding, which is happening across the road, but once they came here, we thought we would keep them. And I'm not sure if we will be doing this for every speaker. Before you speak, they will come up and play a song, but maybe not. Maybe it will take too long. But buenos dias, welcome to Automotive Logistics Mexico. I hope that was an indication of how the conference is going to go. That we want it to be fun, enjoyable, but obviously, there's a lot of business to be done. My name is Louis Yakumi. I'm the group publisher of the Automotive Logistics Group, who are publishers of Automotive Logistics and Finished Vehicle Logistics magazines. And we also organize the Automotive Logistics Global Conferences that are held in Europe, China, USA, UK, Brazil, Russia, India, and of course, marvelous Mexico. And I'm delighted to be back in your beautiful, exciting, vibrant country. And on that note about being back in Mexico, maybe one of the things I should say is some of the presentations will be in Spanish, some of them will be in English. So there are simultaneous translations outside. So if you need the headset, please collect your headset from outside now, because the first presentation will actually be in Spanish and some of the others will be in English. So there is a simultaneous translation. It's only a year since our last Mexico conference, and what's happened in the last year? Not so much, really. I mean, what were the big things last year? The NAFTA talks, but the NAFTA talks are still going on at this very moment, actually. Plants are still opening, investments are still being made. So what we're going to focus on a little bit this year is what's next, what are the next stages. Again, NAFTA is still important. There's the Mexican elections that are coming up. But we're not really politicians. We're here to talk about supply chains and logistics and what are the visions for the future, what investments are being made in logistics and the transport infrastructure. What's being done and what needs to be done to make sure Mexican logistics is world-class and ready for the future. I'm sure all of these things will be discussed in the networking breaks and privately between our delegates throughout the whole conference. We've got a great gathering here. We've got over, or close to 400 people will be attending over the 2 days. And some of the most important people in automotive logistics in Mexico. In fact, some of the most important people globally for automotive logistics. There's just under 150 vehicle makers and part suppliers represented from 50 different car makers, vehicle makers and part suppliers. And that, of course, doesn't include the logistics service providers, associations, and so on. All the attendees are here to kind of discuss how Mexico is going to become premium and is home to premium and world-class car makers. We'll be sharing our thoughts on the new technologies that will change our industry. What investments are being made in the infrastructure? What is the future of Mexican automotive logistics going to look like? We've also invited 40 students who are from Mexico to attend a special session this afternoon to look at, so we can encourage them to join our industry. There's a shortage of many skills in Mexico because the automotive industry, in fact many industries, but the automotive industry is growing so quickly that we need to develop the right talent for the automotive industry. So we've invited 40 students so we can tell them what's exciting about automotive logistics and supply chains, but also hearing from them what their views are and what their needs and expectations are. And of course, we've got the very popular Automotive Logistics Mexico think tanks, where small groups have open and frank discussions on various and maybe more specific parts of the industry. It's a great way to network and share ideas. So please make sure you're open to meeting people and join the discussions. A very good group for you to meet are our sponsors. They sponsor the conference because they've got products or services or knowledge to support your company in the region. Our premier sponsor and host of the gala dinner this evening, Penske Logistics. Our innovation sponsor, CHEP. Our gold sponsors, CNW, Confezioni Andrea Cavacar, KHS, Kuehne & Nagel, ProTrans, RJ & Sons, Royale International, Ryder, who are hosting the lunch, and Schnelliker. Our global sponsors, which means they sponsor all of our conferences around the world, Changju Logistics and Jeffco. And our silver sponsors, Grupo CSI, Lamex, Rubicon, VLS, and Transportes Marva. So visit their stands, read their literature, and meet their people. Automotive Logistics Mexico is also part of the Automotive Logistics Live program. So we're using an app to enhance the experience of being part of Automotive Logistics Mexico. You can see some of the information on the screen. You will have received emails reminding you to download the app, and those who already have told me that they're already reaping the benefits of using the app for networking and keeping up to date with what's happening in the program. That's one of the ways of getting onto the live page from our website as well. And we have, for those of you in the room who need the Wi-Fi, we've got a special Wi-Fi code which is AL Mexico and ALMX 18, and the password is ProTrans. We chose that password because ProTrans are sponsoring the Wi-Fi. It also means that the conference is being streamed live across the world. Already got registrations from USA, India, France, Germany, Brazil, China, Canada, Argentina, and the UK. Hello, Mum. So it just shows you the interest there is for Mexico from around the world. You can use the app to ask questions, which us moderators can see, or you can make comments for the whole audience to see. You can even send direct messages to other attendees. So please log on to user service, and you can see various instructions around. We'll also use the app for a voting survey a little bit later on. So make sure, there's so many things to benefit from logging on. But most importantly is what you do in the room. Mexico has always been an interactive conference with real participation, questions, and opinions in the sessions. If the noise in the conference, in the cocktail reception is anything to go by, I'm sure this will continue in the conference. Once again, you can see red and green cards on your chairs or on your tables in front of you. So those are we use those just for quick snap questions. So to get you used to it, to get to using the red cards, I just want to ask, if you enjoyed the cocktail reception last night, which was hosted by Royale International, please raise your card. Green side if you enjoyed it and found it a great icebreaker. Red card if you didn't enjoy it. And if you're colorblind, it doesn't matter which one you hold up. So good. Overall, it seems that most of you enjoyed it. So thank you very much. I'm glad you enjoyed the cocktail reception. But as you said, we want to carry this through the whole conference. By now, most of you should have logged on to the Automotive Logistics Live. So we'll start with a quick polling question. This question will be up for the rest of the session, so you can answer it at your leisure. But we're going to put it up now, and you'll be able to see it on your app. There's a part of your app that says about voting surveys. So log on to that, and you'll see the question, which is, what is your company's outlook for its business or logistics operations, or what are your budgets for Mexico in 2018 compared to last year? So is it A, will it substantially increase by double digits year on year? Will it increase somewhat, a little bit? Will it remain the same? Will it decrease, or do you expect it to decrease substantially? So those are the questions. You can see it on the app. You can answer now, or you can answer at your leisure during this session, and we'll give the answer to this at the end of this session. But I've been very, very fortunate to have a great panel to start off this conference. Which I said we're not politicians, and we're looking at it from a supply chain perspective, but we're going to get a feel for what is being done in Mexico, who by, what the governments are doing to support the automotive industry in Mexico. So we've got a great panel here, which includes the Automotive Industry Director from the Secretariat of the Economy, someone from the US-Mexico Chamber of Commerce, someone from the COMEXA, the German-Mexico Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and then we'll finalize with a global and Mexican forecast and a discussion about the new mobility with PwC. The first speaker, as I said, we're very honored to have once again support from the Secretariat of the Economy. They've supported us every year, and often the actual Secretary himself has been a speaker. Unfortunately, apparently, this year he's put the NAFTA talks and the Davos conference ahead of us, which I can't understand. But very fortunately, they've given us a very important representative, perhaps someone who's even more specific for our industry. So I'd like to welcome to the podium Amalia Espinosa, the Automotive Industry Director for the Secretary of the Economy. I should add that it will be a standalone keynote presentation. At the end of Ms. Espinosa's presentation, we'll be taking questions directly for her because then she has to go for other meetings. But thank you very much, Amalia.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. It's my pleasure to be here with you. And now you were expecting for Mr. Guajardo. He would have liked to be here with you. Unfortunately, now he's in Davos. Please excuse him. As we said, mine is one in Spanish. My speech is in Spanish. Sorry for not preparing in English, but you have real-time translation, so I'm sure there won't be any problem. Let me start by saying, en nombre del Secretario de Economía, licenciado Ildefonso Guajardo Villarreal, y por supuesto del mío propio, agradezco la invitación para participar nuevamente en este importante evento, Automotive Logistics. Como el propio licenciado Guajardo lo ha dicho en sus intervenciones anteriores en este foro, para la Secretaría de Economía es de suma importancia mantener la comunicación con los sectores relevantes de la economía, como es el caso de las empresas que están aquí representadas por ustedes. Gracias por este espacio. En esta ocasión, por su relevancia en la economía mexicana y por el propio contexto internacional, centraré mi intervención justo en los datos duros y relevantes de la industria.
Raw data related to the automotive industry. In the context of priorities established by the federal government and competitiveness of this sector, we are going to talk about the progress and expectations. After a year of the Trump's administration, the automotive industry has a very positive dynamics. We have to keep in mind that in 2016, the automotive industry accounted for the 3.28% of the total GDP and 55% of the manufacturing GDP. And to the third quarter of 2017, which is the recent data, this share increased. They went from 3.56% and 20.51% respectively. From January to December 2016, the automotive exports accounted for $104 billion. From November to December last year, the value for these exports also increased, and we got to $108 billion. This accounted for 32.5% of the manufacturing exports and 29% of total exports. In 2017, we reached targets of automotive production 2.8 million vehicles, 8.9% more than 2016. Same thing happened in vehicle exports, which accounted to 3.1 million units, 12.51% increase compared to 2016. It is important to point out that the export market that is much more relevant for the automotive industry in Mexico kept a rigorous trend in 2016-17 because we sold 2.3 billion vehicles, 9.4% more than the vehicles sold last year. So we had a 75% share of exports. The U.S. market is relevant for Mexico, but we have also been working on diversifying our market. The concentration of exports to our country was reduced based compared to the previous year. In 2016, we had a share of 77%, and by the end of 2017, it was 75.3%. That did not mean a reduction on value and national production. The exports to this nation had an increase. Asia, Africa, Europe, of course, it is a very important market for us, and Latin America saw an increase on the automotive exports. As of August 2017, the staff in the automotive production industry was over 860,000 people, and this was more than 22% of the staff used in the manufacturing industry. The automotive industry is an important sector that fosters a region. We have major companies, automotive companies in Mexico, and this has translated into more qualified and better paid jobs and a development of the human capital in this region. Mexico offers lots of advantages, and this has allowed us to keep a positive trend and a great expectation. Mexico's government keeps the confidence of the competitiveness in this sector. In the current administration, we have announced investment such as light trucks for over $15 billion. This has translated into a major flow on the establishment of new suppliers. This is why the industrial policy that has been implemented by the Secretariat of Economy is focused on the conditions to keep Mexico in the highest levels of retention and appeal for the manufacturing industry, especially for those that provide an added value, such as the automotive industry. We are famous for our world-class manufacturing process. 50% of those exports are manufacturing products, from out of which most of them are sophisticated technology, which contributes to the parts and light trucks in Mexico. Despite of all of this, in the context of changes in manufacturing in terms of political environment and the economy, this is not enough to keep the competitive trend in Mexico, because we need to have a basis of suppliers with innovative capability and a level of priority that has to be focused on the intellect to provide more value to the produced materials. In the Secretariat of the Economy, we are convinced that we have to take advantage of our potential to create advantages that can develop capabilities that go beyond the cost. There's no doubt that the automotive industry has made great progress because it is a sophisticated industry, and more industries in the sector base their production in advanced manufacturing, technological innovation, and elevated high production. This is an industrial and a sector that can support the market in a sustainable manner. This is why the policy in terms of the development of the P&D is focused on the strengthening of the innovation capabilities, and also the supply chain productivity and all the factors that are relevant that provide long-term advantages to lead Mexico to the most important global stakeholders and actors. In this sense, logistics, of course, is very relevant. As we all know, the World Bank has shown that logistics is basic for economic growth in all countries. Logistics has been acknowledged as one of the main columns of the economic development. The most advanced economies and the emerging economies have acknowledged the need to set up solid policies to keep the chain supply and supply chains and logistics as a factor of growth. This has to connect companies with international and national markets through the networks of supply chains. The main countries that have a low logistics performance have low costs and also a low performance in general, which is not helpful for the country. For the logistics companies, the global chains are complex, that their performance depends on the level of efficiency of the logistics strategy. This is also linked to the characteristics of a country. The Secretariat of the Economy knows this. So in coordination with the automotive industry, has created a structure of logistics in Mexico that will be an essential input for the design and implementation of actions that will be encouraging competitiveness of this sector and others. The public policy actions implemented by the federal government will be led to the target of keeping competitiveness of the automotive industry. It is a pleasure, as always, to share general ideas with all of you, and we would love to have your feedback and know what your interests are. So thank you again for the invitation.
Como dijimos, queremos que ustedes también tengan la oportunidad de plantear.
Tongalia, so if you have any questions, because we'll have to leave straight after this for some important meetings. So if you have any questions, you can use the app, and I've had a couple of questions on the app, but we do give priority really to the people in the room. So if you have a question, raise your hand. The question can be in Spanish or English, not German, I'm afraid. And wait for the microphone to come to you so we can all hear you clearly. So I can see there's a question at the back. Thank you.
Muy buenos días, Eduardo Asperó de la empresa Hub Group. Nos preocupa evidentemente a todos los presentes el efecto de las negociaciones actuales, particularmente en la industria automotriz. ¿Qué nos puede decir
regarding the automotive industry? What can you say about last Monday's measure of imposing a 20% fee for solar panels? Is this what we must expect from this complex negotiation, which is just diverting attention, because the end goal is that vehicles manufactured in Mexico will have to pay a tariff in the United States, 20% or even higher than we have today.
Buenos días. La medida anunciada en días pasados con relación a productos específicos, en este caso lavadoras,
specific products. In this case, you're talking about washers. I know what you're saying. We should not interpret that as the definite establishment of a tariff. It has been temporarily established, and it stems from research requested by one of the parties. In no way whatsoever we can say that this is the U.S. government's decision of imposing tariffs on certain products and that they may lead to tariffs imposed upon the automotive industry. We all know that these measures are not only regulated in terms of specific processes in the countries, but they also are part of the World Trade Organization. And outside NAFTA, both parties have specific tariffs for all of the products within the general import and export tariffs. And as I was saying, these measures are used for research purposes, and they are in no way whatsoever a final ruling. I don't know if this is a diverting element, but I can confirm that the Mexican government, through the Ministry of the Economy, continues with the negotiation work groups and rounds under the same premises that you've heard from Secretary Guajardo and from the general government. We have committed all of our efforts in order to maintain and to improve our commercial relation throughout North America, and we understand that the automotive industry is one of the most relevant one. We need to think that imposition of tariffs may not ever take place arbitrarily outside a treaty, or if we did not have a free trade agreement, the benefits of our commercial relationship have to be established within the context of our tariffs. For the automotive industry, the tariff average to import from the United States of products within general tariffs does not exceed 2.5%. So I believe that our interpretation of this topic must be deeper. And my suggestion is to consider it within the context of an investigation, and it is in no way whatsoever a final ruling of the U.S. government, nor for that product, for that sector, or for the general products that we export.
Really is, we're hearing about what we want from you, but what can the automotive industry and maybe the logistics industry do to help you? What would you like to see from us, what information or more contact to help you at the Ministry of Economy help us?
La industria automotriz,
The automotive industry, just like most industries established in Mexico that have developed a productive platform export-wise, they work alongside with the federal government and specifically with the Ministry of the Economy. Most of you have been part of the technical support work groups for the negotiation rounds, and there is plenty to do. I believe that both in Mexico and in the rest of the world, the automotive industry does provide us with input for the work we are conducting. The automotive industry, as we all know, has emphasized and underscored how important it is for them to maintain the benefits of the free trade agreement, and they have deliberately expressed so to their own government, to the U.S. government. Logistically speaking, I believe that transversally, all industries are intertwined. The federal government of Mexico has a specific interest not only in doing diagnose, because there is work to do, but the experience of the automotive industry in acknowledging how relevant it is to have efficient supply chains is what becomes more evident when it comes to continuing with high competitiveness. Of course, the main logistic companies or transportation, trade sectors have been in close contact with the Ministry of the Economy, that they're part of this diagnosis. We appreciate having permanent contact in order to get feedback on the information that could be useful for decision-making purposes. But I would like to underscore that the automotive industry undoubtedly has been one of the key players between Mexico and the United States.
Thank you. A question that we got through on our app is was really a very topical one, I guess, about are you seeing or can you see people holding back on investment in Mexico because of the current kind of political uncertainty?
absolutely not. Tenemos...
Desde luego que no. There is no element as to reach to the conclusion that the negotiations of the free trade agreement may give rise to investment reduction. Our geographical position, competitiveness in terms of market access, historically speaking, has these elements have drawn investment. But we need to acknowledge that the status and the level to which many industries have reached in Mexico do not necessarily focus on tariff preferences. We do have privileged access not only to the US and to Canada, but to the main markets of the world as well, Europe and Asia. Specifically regarding the automotive industry, investment decisions do not depend on a month, a year, or a situation, but they depend on the structural competitive advantages provided by our country. We all know that skills or geographic position, supply, or logistic times in which products reach Asia, Europe. We all know that those timetables are extremely important for companies regarding profit and margin. And it's also linked to the level of competitiveness and infrastructure permanently established in Mexico. Well, something like that cannot be held back within this situation. It is true, and we do not have an absolute definition of what will happen with NAFTA. Nevertheless, investment and economic sectors clearly understand where competitive lies in, and Mexico continues to offer that competitiveness. I do believe that this is a type of reasoning that leads us to believe that claiming that investments will not be renewed or will not be scheduled. I think that those statements basically have to do with market trends or with market changes, and I don't think those statements have to do with specific or temporary provisions of the U.S. government, and it is not the decision of eliminating Mexico as an investment destination, because this country remains to be competitive. And as the hard data proves so, I believe that it is even more so now, because in the past we only had competitive labor costs. Today, human capital training in terms of the industry and long-term investment has grown in importance and relevance. And maturity of the industries represented in this room, cannot be eliminated in terms of a political decision that may only have certain collateral effects. In no way whatsoever we can claim that investments have been held back or withdrawn.
And then maybe a final question from me really is, obviously a big part of the trade is to the USA, partly because of the NAFTA issues, in case that anything happens, and just also part of the general globalization of the Mexican automotive industry. Are you also pushing very hard on other regions, and which other regions or countries, or are you looking at to encourage more trade with Mexico from an automotive perspective?
Well, it's not my...
No es mi responsabilidad hablar sobre las negociaciones comerciales internacionales, pero como usted está diciendo, este proceso de globalización nos ha conducido a una posición específica porque somos muy atractivos para muchos otros mercados. Por ejemplo, hay empresas coreanas en México y realmente no hay acuerdo de libre comercio con Corea. Significa únicamente que les parecemos muy competitivos.
Some companies, some regions have started asking us to new negotiations with new countries, but why don't we finish with this process of NAFTA negotiation? And of course, for Mexico, it's very important to be open with many other countries but first of all have benefit negotiation, not just for Mexico, but we have to have something interesting to offer to the other country. I wouldn't be able to give you information about it, but we are analyzing it.
Okay, well, I think we have to allow the wonderful speaker there, who's just been asked to leave the conference now to go to her other meeting. So I just want to say thank you for your presentation, and thank you for answering the questions and giving us full and honest answers. Thank you very much.
No, thank you.
Thank you. So now we will continue with the rest of the session. Again, we've got some great speakers still to come. Would like to remind you about use of the app, because you can see that I asked at least one of the questions on the app, and also don't forget the voting question that we put up earlier, so you can vote on that as well. So you can do that any time during this session. Maybe a quick red and green card thing as well. At this moment in time, are you, having said it, it's part of, I'll leave it to the next question. I'll leave it to the question at the end, because that's probably incorporated in that. So I'll leave it for now. And just start turning to some of the other panelists. Mr. Jose Garcia, President of the U.S.-Mexico Chamber of Commerce, the Mexican chapter based here. Would you like to say a few words on your findings and what the U.S.-Mexico Chamber is doing?
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. I would like to speak in Spanish. Our chamber, la Cámara de Comercio México-Estados Unidos, es una organización que tiene
is an organization with almost 50 years of existence. We've collaborated alongside different companies, and the founders of the chamber were basically major Mexican and U.S. corporations of the time. Throughout these 40 or so years, we've been collaborating with the private sector, with the government of both countries regarding trade and investment. We've assisted companies in facilitating their arrival process to Mexico. And we've also assisted them in the different procedures when they are trying to reach Mexico with their investment. Our job, about 4 years ago, we found out about Automotive logistics, about this company. We met them in Detroit, and we've been working closely in tight collaboration, supporting setting up these type of events, providing them with access to certain government organizations or to the private sector as well, in order to set up this session, this conference. The chamber has over 3,000 members, both from Mexico and the United States. The Mexican side are subsidiaries of those U.S. companies. But I must say that in the last 5 to 6 years, the Chamber has also welcomed memberships from other countries, not only from the United States. We have members from Canada, from Australia, from Singapore, China, Korea, India. They have reached out to our organization, and we have tried to give them support in their arrival process to Mexico. Just to add on to the information provided to us by Ms. Amalia, I would like to say that from the Chamber's perspective, we see interest not only among U.S. companies, but companies from all over the world are interested in coming to Mexico. I believe that the decision has been put off in some cases of coming to Mexico, but I would like to say that most, even U.S. companies, but most companies that are coming to Mexico are they're making that decision. They want to come and they're moving actively. I would also like to say that investment from Asia is also playing an extremely important role, and not only in the automotive industry, many other sectors are pretty active. And I'm saying this because I have to deal with these corporations on a periodically basis, and they have all made progress in their arrival process to Mexico. This is one of this chamber's main activities, and I want to hear what our colleagues from the German chamber have to say, because there's another speaker from PricewaterhouseCoopers, and I want to know what they have to say about the sector as well. And I just wanted to let you know, if you have concerns about how your business has evolved in Mexico, or if you're concerned about any limitations or restrictions in fulfilling the process that will allow you to improve your performance in Mexico. If you have any concerns, if you have questions, it would be great for us to have the chance to talk to you, to provide you our support so you can meet the objectives and the benefits you're looking for. So I would now like to leave this conversation for the moment. Amalia already provided us with the Ministry of the Economy's perspective. She gave us an overview of what they're doing. So instead of me talking, I would like to address your questions, or throughout this week that we'll be here together, I'll be fully available to answer your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jose. US-Mexico Chamber of Commerce is a great organization, helps us a lot with our conferences, and also, I guess just by the name, have got very strong contacts in government at the highest levels in US and Mexico. Now to hear another perspective on what another region is perhaps learning, doing, finding out, and doing to support their companies to and from and in Mexico. I'd like to welcome to the podium Andreas Müller, the Deputy Director of CAMEXA. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Luis, for the invitation. I'm very delighted to be with you here today. I would like to speak to you a little bit about what we're doing, starting with the relation between Mexico and Germany, a little bit the Mexican automotive industry, why is it important for Germany, the foreign trade, import and export, a little bit, a few figures. What is our view on NAFTA from the German company side, and what are we doing as a chamber? How are we helping our companies and obviously also other companies? We are open there. We work together with all kinds of companies, as Jose already said. As chambers, we are usually trying to work for everyone. And finally, how are German companies doing business in Mexico? What are the obstacles they might find, or how they are getting together, the two cultures, which seem very different but are not that much different. So first, who are we? Our mission is to build economic relations, or to foster them, between Mexico and Germany. Our founding was in 1929, so this is quite a while ago. Today we represent the interests of 810 companies with relation between Germany and Mexico. These are German companies, obviously, with investment here in Mexico, but also a lot of service providers who are interested to work together with the German companies or Mexican companies with interest in Germany. So we are representing their interests in front of government institutions, other business associations. We also form part of a very broad network, of an international network, our chamber network all over the world. We have 90 chambers in almost more or less 100 countries where we are present with our network. We all are part of the same, we offer the same services. We always work together with the German companies in these different countries. So if you work together with us, you don't work only with Germany. We have also access to a broad variety of other markets. We have four main areas of expertise. What we are doing, we're obviously a platform for our membership. So we have councils where we meet on different topics like finance, like human resources, security, or many others. Then we are helping German companies in their soft landing in Mexico. If any German company is coming new to Mexico, their first stop normally is with us. But we are bilateral chamber, so we also open to help Mexican companies to get on the German market. We are representing the main trade shows in Germany. For those who know Germany, the trade shows in Germany are the market leaders usually in their fields. As you know, Mexico will be this year the partner country for the Hannover Messe, which is one of the most important industry fairs worldwide. And the fourth area of expertise is training solutions and dual vocational education. I will follow up on that a little bit later. What is the status quo of our relations? We have more or less 2,000 registered companies with German capital here in Mexico, accumulating about $35 billion of historic investment. The German investment is quite old in comparison to other countries. German companies, well, you know, Volkswagen recently had their 50th anniversary. Siemens is here for 125 years. We have BASF, many other companies, big German companies who have a long history here in Mexico. But also German small and medium-sized enterprises are situated here in Mexico. They came obviously after NAFTA. NAFTA was a huge driver to bring German companies into Mexico. And then again, the EU-Mexico Free Trade Agreement was the next big driver. And I would say right now we are in the third big phase. The German companies are coming to Mexico due to the large automotive investments from Audi, BMW, and Daimler-Benz. Some other sectors besides the automotive manufacturing sector is obviously electronic engineering, with Siemens being the leader, pharmaceutical industry, chemical industry, BASF, Bayer, well, you know the majority of them. Obviously also logistics is a big German topic. You know, we have Schenker, we have many others, DHL, and many others. Where are they located, German companies? Well, obviously in Mexico City and in the Bajío region, Querétaro, Guanajuato, San Luis Potosí, obviously after the investment of BMW will be the next big hub of German companies. Also in Jalisco, we have a big automotive industry, Hella, Continental, many others. And the other cluster of German companies you can find in the northeast of Mexico, Monterrey and Saltillo. And to give you more or less a number of how many people we employ, it's about 150,000 employees here in Mexico of German companies. Here a small glimpse of what different companies we represent. You see here this is obviously also only a small amount of companies. There are many more. So let's have a look on what Germany means for Mexico in their export. 3.1% right now go to Germany. We have seen a large increase in the numbers of, in dollars, in the export of Mexico to Germany. And this is mainly to the Q5 which is now really heading on its peak of production. So as it is built here for the world market, it's also built for the German on the European market. So this is going up very strongly. But as you can see here, the US is the most important market for Mexico. You know that better than any others. That is obviously brings some insecurity right now, as the NAFTA negotiations are not concluded and we don't know really what will be. The presence in the terms of automotive suppliers in Mexico, there Germany, after Mexican suppliers, US, Japan, is number 3 from external markets and number 4 in general. You know about the latest OEM investments in Mexico. You have Audi, BMW, and the investment of Daimler together with Nissan. With Audi already producing since last year, or since September 2016, BMW starting 2019, and we will see if Nissan Daimler will start this year. And you have obviously the planned expansion of Volkswagen for the Tiguan and the next Jetta generation coming up. For automotive suppliers, here some figures also. Bosch, obviously, as one of the main Mexican suppliers, they're investing very strongly. Also Siemens and then some other German companies. So obviously, the NAFTA negotiations, they have an impact on German companies. We can't lie about that. That's clear that we live in this right now in this insecurity. In general, we welcome a focus, or the renegotiation of the agreement is not a bad thing if you have a focus really on updating the instrument, because it's an old instrument. No? It's 25 years old, so it's really not bad to look at it, to look into it, and to find areas of opportunity to make it better. But still, 68% of Camexa companies, we made our inquiry in December last year, they still plan to invest. This is much what Amelia also told us. There's no really interest in stopping the investment, so there will be still a strong investment by German companies in this year. What will be in case of failure of negotiations? 69% of our companies expect a negative impact on their business because, well, you have seen the figures. If 70 or 80% of Mexican exports go to the US, obviously there is an impact. This is the business model of Mexico, to be the world producer for the world market, and the US is their key account market, so there will be an impact. Still, the WTO rules will put Mexico in an advantage towards the US. We also know that also in terms of tariffs, but still it will send a bad signal. So as this was the business model of Mexico for so many years, and is a substantial change, so we will see that will be a bad signal. Still, there is also a great opportunity to work stronger together. We also heard that, which will be other markets which could be interesting for Mexico. Obviously, the European market is very interesting for Mexico. We have a free trade agreement for almost 17 or 18 years now. So there's a big opportunity to strengthen the relations between Europe and Mexico, and obviously Germany, as the most important business partner within the European Union, will be a very interesting partner for Mexico. And I think the point that Mexico will be the partner country on Hannover Messe this year is showing that Mexico really wants to foster this relationship with Europe and Germany. Here just a little bit the questions we did to our membership. So according to business survey, German companies assess their short-term opportunities of doing business in Mexico differently. How do you evaluate your short-term opportunities of doing business in Mexico? So it's mainly good. Would the termination of NAFTA have negative impacts on your business in Mexico? As you see, 2/3 of our companies would say clearly yes, but it's obvious. No? Well, it would be for every country or every company in Mexico, it will have, in the first place, a negative impact. So what are we doing for the automotive sector to get in a more positive mood, leaving NAFTA behind? What are we doing currently? We know that there are, we have a great lack, our analysis with our companies is that Mexico has a very good outcome in engineering. Well, we have a lot of engineers. To study to be an engineer in Mexico is a very positive, is a positive connotation. So you have a lot of engineers, but still on the technical level, there's a great lack of skilled labor. So we have an answer to that in Germany. We have what we call the dual vocational training, which is a system where youngsters who want to be a technician in a specific area, they learn in the company. So they are 80% of their time when they are becoming a technician, they spend 80% of their training inside the company, and the schools are only accompanying the whole process with the theory. But the practical expertise they're getting inside the companies. So we are applying this mainly in the automotive sector. As you all know, there's a big need of technicians, and with some big companies like Magna, Bosch, Schuller, Müller, Weingarten, Volkswagen and Audi, we are implementing the German system as it is in Germany here in Mexico in the following careers in mechatronics and for the tool makers, the industrial mechanic, car body constructor, the autotronics and the electrician for automatization. These are the careers we are applying there. The majority of these companies, they have their own schools, like Volkswagen, Audi, and Schuller, and Magna and Bosch. They're working mainly together with the technological universities, or las universidades tecnológicas here in Mexico. They have, well, Magna is doing this for 12 years, or maybe 15 years now, Bosch for 40 years, Audi since they're here, and Volkswagen for 50 years now. So this is really their way to have very good skilled labor. So there was a big interest also from the Mexican private sector, the Ministry of Education, to adapt the German system to a Mexican system. We are quite advanced at this. We started with a pilot project in 2013. There's a regulation now since 2015 for that. And there is Coparmex, Canacintra, Concanaco, they're all participating in this model. You surely will hear more about that because the government is really keen to foster this kind of model here in Mexico. Our part in this is we make the trainer programs for the responsible personnel in the companies to implement the training, and we certify these trainers and also the apprentices who come out of the program at the end. We also have some solutions for environmental business policies, mainly in the field of energy efficiency management systems. For about 6 years now, we're implementing a training which is called the European Energy Manager. We made there one project, for example, with Continental, with 6 of their plants. We implemented this training. It was a very interesting effort. And now we have a new instrument which is called the Learning Networks, which is bringing together a group of plants in the case of Bosch, or a group of companies in the case of the automotive cluster in Nuevo León, where we bring together a bunch of companies, and we work together with them around a year. And in this year, they start to implement their own energy efficiency management systems according to ISO 50001. We have something similar also for environmental management systems based on ISO 40001. What are the key, now coming to another topic, if you're interested in one of these services, please contact us, or today there's also 2 of our personnel. There's Ruth with us here in the room, and she will be here the whole day. So if you're interested in one of these services, just come to her. We will have my email at the end of the presentation. So just very quickly, what are some key challenges for German companies in Mexico? How do we arrive here in Mexico? So this mentality of, well, we do it later, or that you have another, I would say it's a different feeling for time, which is a little bit complicating sometimes the work. Obviously, the personnel which comes here needs a lot of interpersonal, intercultural skills. I would put the emphasis on interpersonal, as Mexico is a very personal orientated culture. If you send someone from outside, from another culture, he really has to know how to interact with Mexicans if it really has to work. So courtesy and respect is there, the key words, I would say. Create good personal relationships. This is the basis. It's also very important in Mexico to formalize things, but still you need to follow up everything on a personal level. If you don't do that, there won't happen anything. And so we, as Germans, are not used to that very much. So we have to be patient. That's another very important skill you need as a manager here. And also, if you bring together our German long-term planning approach with the Mexican flexibility, if you bring that together and you make it work, I have heard a lot of German managers who say they are much more productive here in Mexico than in Germany. Because if you really reach to bring together these two strongholds for every culture, you can create something very strong. So here I have a quotation of a German supplier manager. We made a study in April last year, so this was one of the outcomes. He says, the Germans have their mentality and the Mexicans have their mentality. So the big challenge would be to really destroy stereotypes, because not every single German is super square-minded, disciplined, or cold-hearted. And not every Mexican is funny and party-like and laughing. So these stereotypes are sometimes hard to break. So really taking advantage of these cultural differences is a big challenge, and it's actually something that, if done in the proper way, can potentially be very, very strong. So this is what I was just saying. If you really bring together these two cultures, which seem very different but are not that different, because both cultures are trying to do well, to work well, to have a very hard work ethic, I think, also in Mexico as in Germany. So if you bring it properly together, you have a very, very good and strong potential. So I would like to end with this. I exceeded a little bit in time, I'm sorry for that. Here you have my email address. If you're interested in any of these topics we are doing or trying to implement here in Mexico, I would just want to address one more thing, because we were approached by CONUE, which is the Council for Energy Efficiency from the Ministry of Energy here in Mexico. And they're extremely interested to implement a learning network, as I presented just a few minutes ago, with the transport sector. So as you are working in that, I really would like you to approach us, because we need like 6 to 12 companies with whom to implement a first pilot on that. We could have resources by German corporation for that, which could help us to make their pilot. But this is really a big topic the German government, the Mexican government would like to foster, and I think you are the right people to talk to on this topic. How to get energy efficiency into the transportation sector. So, thank you very much.
Thank you, Andreas. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Andreas. Again, giving us an interesting view on what your organisation is doing and what some of the German companies are thinking and doing in Mexico. We are overrunning a little bit this session, but that was because of the late addition of Ms. Espinosa from the Ministry of Economy. So we thought it was important to include her in the program. So we're running a little bit late, but we'll obviously still make sure we have the time for the coffee breaks and so on. But next up, I'd like to welcome to the podium Brandon Mason, Automotive Director and Mobility Leader from PwC.
Thanks, sir. Thank you, Louis. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I want to walk you through a few trends that we're seeing in 2018 this morning. We'll start with a quick recap of where we were at last year, where we finished as an industry, and then talk a little bit about some myths versus realities as we think about the future of our industry, and specifically next-gen mobility around things like autonomous, connected, and the like. So let us begin with a recap of 2017, and what you're looking at here is U.S. historical sales going back from 2007, pre-recessionary period, all the way up to last year. So as most of you know, we finally snapped our sales growth streak. 7 consecutive years of sales growth that had never happened in the history of the U.S., unlikely to happen again. But we still had a very strong year in 2017. We came in at 17.2 million units. The chart on the right shows the monthly SAAR numbers. Actually, at the beginning of the year, most forecasters, including our own team, at PwC within AutoFacts forecasted a much lower number, somewhere in the mid to high 16 million unit range. But again, as most of you know, we had two major hurricanes hit the southern and southeast United States towards the last half of the year, which actually created a pretty significant uptick if you look at the last few months in terms of SAR for vehicle recovery volume. We lost anywhere between 500,000 to 1 million units of vehicles out of our vehicle park that had to be replaced. Some of those were replaced by new vehicles, some of those were replaced by used vehicles, but we feel it added somewhere between 300 and 500,000 units to the new sales top line. And you can see the SAR numbers there towards the end of the year. We had a 18.5 million unit SAR, 17.5, and then we finished December with a 17.8 million unit SAR. So, even though it was technically a down year, still a very strong year. If you look at Canada, Canada was actually up, and they had a record sales year around 2 million units last year. And I believe Mexico was down ever so slightly, and I think they came in at around 1.5 million units for the year. So what are some trends that we're looking at now as we look to 2018? Some of them are obvious, some of them a little less so. Let's take a look and see where the industry is headed in terms of from a segmentation perspective. Right? This chart on the left shows the breakout between light truck and passenger cars. And you can see the direction that we're heading, it's to the point now where it's unlikely that we're really going to turn back. So at the end of last year in the U.S., 2/3 of the market, roughly 65%, was light trucks. So that's pickup trucks, SUVs, crossovers. Canada had a similar number. I think Canada was closer to 70%, and Mexico was sort of the opposite, right, where it's roughly 2/3 passenger cars and 1/3 light trucks. So there was a few things driving this. I mean, you can see we have the chart all the way back to 1981 that shows the share. Added utility, low fuel prices, low interest rates, all have driven up the share of light trucks. You now have those as more profitable vehicles compared to the passenger cars. And if you look at the vehicles that are being introduced, if anybody was in Detroit last week at the North American International Auto Show, you could see it, right? I'd say roughly 80% of the new vehicle introductions were, in fact, pickups, SUVs, and crossovers compared to the passenger cars. So it's a fundamental shift within the U.S. and in Canada that one we don't see us going back from because of those things. And it's not even a fuel price issue anymore. If you look historically, it looks like 2001, 2002 was the first time that light trucks actually surpassed passenger cars in terms of market share. It went back down below passenger cars in 2008 as the recession hit and gas hit $4 a gallon. And then again a few years later in 2012 when fuel prices were hovering around $3.50, $4 a gallon. That no longer appears to be the case, right? The industry is much more resilient to fuel hikes. With an easing of the fuel efficiency and emission standards potentially on the horizon, there's really no looking back at this point. And this isn't just a U.S. or Canadian phenomenon. It's actually very much a global phenomenon. If you look at the largest automotive market in the world, China, they've seen double-digit increases in crossover and pickup and SUV share, maybe less so in pickup, more SUV and CV share over the last several years. The chart on the right breaks that further out by segment within the light truck segment, and you can see where the growth really is, right? It's the crossover utility vehicles, and automakers are adding crossover utility vehicles to their lineup as quickly as they possibly can. And again, filling those lineups all the way down from subcompact to full-size, flagship, etc. You've seen a small uptick in both pickup and SUV sales. The only one that's still sort of kind of leveled off is vans, again, as folks switch to crossovers from vans. So this is a trend, obviously highly profitable vehicles for the most part if you think about crossovers. So it's one that, at least for now, the industry is happy to accommodate in terms of consumer demand. And I want you to remember this as we get through the presentation and think about all the outlook and optimism around things like electric vehicles. Remember this stat, right? As we stand here today, 2/3 of the U.S. industry is light trucks instead of passenger cars. All right. Another trend that we're looking at and keeping an eye on is transaction prices. And those, again, if you think about what we just talked about with the increase of light trucks, also with low financing, right? And again, the need for added utility. Prices are going up, right? It's easier to finance these vehicles. People are getting more options on these vehicles. And as I've said in the past, things like the addition of safety, fuel efficiency, and entertainment options on those vehicles are all driving those prices up. So the question is, with higher interest rates on the horizon, will that finally slow consumers down in terms of the average transaction price? And the short answer is probably not, right? If you think about new vehicle sales, and when we look at the US, it's basically the upper quintile of GDP, or excuse me, of consumers. The upper 20% of consumers are the vast majority of those people buying products. And they're more resilient to things like interest rate hikes and the like. So it doesn't seem likely for 2018 that we're going to see a slowdown of the average transaction price. It's up some 20% since 2009. We expect this trend to continue through 2018. So let's talk a little bit about interest rates. The chart that you see here is the effective federal funds rate for the U.S. If you're not familiar with the federal funds rate, that is created by the Fed, by the Federal Open Market Committee. That basically is the benchmark for interest rates for things like housing mortgage rates and auto loan interest rates. So as you can see, as we got into the recession in 2008, 2009, the Fed funds rate was essentially zero, right? And that was meant to help stimulate growth. The FOMC, when they set the Fed funds rate, looks at three main things, right? You're looking at GDP, inflation, and unemployment. And so obviously we know what the story was for that. And then they were very conservative. They didn't want to bring it up too quickly for fear of a double dip recession. So we didn't see an increase until the end of 2015. And as it stood last month at the end of 2017, the Fed funds rate was 1.3%. There are 3 anticipated rate hikes for this year, given the overall economic situation in the U.S., which is relatively prosperous. And what they do is they poll each of the FOMC members on where they think the Fed funds rate is going to be over the next 3 years. So if you look at the median rate, for 2018, the median was 2.1%, 2019, 2.7%, and then up to 3.1% in 2020. So interest rates are going up, right? So the question is, what impact does that have on automotive loans? So one, there's a lag in terms of the impact that has. So, and it's not always a one-for-one, right? So obviously we know, the average prime rate for auto loans right now is somewhere between 4 and 4.5% in the U.S. You will see a lag. And the question that often gets asked is, well, how much does the average vehicle payment go up? It's difficult to predict for a couple reasons. One, because it depends how much you finance, right? What's your credit score? So what interest rate do you qualify for, and what's the term of your loan, right? So, I mean, if you look at where it's at today at 1.3%, and then you look ahead to 2020 and say, all right, we're going to have almost a 2 percentage point increase, that's significant, right? So that is going to have an impact on the overall sales top line. I just mentioned how, the upper quintile is largely resilient or protected from this, but it is going to have an impact longer term, right? So this is one of the things that plays into our sales top line forecast for the U.S. So interest rate increases are coming. So if you're looking to buy a vehicle, maybe do it sooner rather than later, or else you're going to be paying a little bit more for it. Tax reform. Okay. So there's a couple things that I need to explain about tax reform. One, I'm not a tax expert, and I'm not going to pretend to be up here. Luckily, PwC has thousands of tax experts, right, that have been analyzing the new tax reform legislation since it was passed last month. And so it is a 500-page document, right? And the early feedback is there are a lot of things within this new legislation that still need to be sorted out. Within the initial legislation, there were 80, call it components within it, that mandates that the Treasury take a look and further refine or explain what those policies will be. In digging through that legislation, our team found over 800 examples that need further clarification from the Treasury, from the Fed. So it's going to be a while before we get the full picture of what the tax legislation reform is going to do. So longer term, we don't quite know, right? But I wanted to walk you through just a couple of the highlights from both the individual tax reform and then the corporate tax reform. So let's start with the individual tax reform. Basically, it set new tax brackets. So folks that are in the low to middle income tax brackets generally are going to receive a tax cut anywhere from a few $100s up to maybe a few $1,000s. The standard deductions have increased for both single and joint filers. So there's more incentive to do the standardized deduction. You'd also get more back on your taxes as a result of that. There's a cap on local tax deductions, so the property taxes that you pay, you can deduct those up to $10,000. Deductions on mortgages, on interest you pay on mortgages, they've capped that at $750,000 loans. That was previously $1 million, so that's come down a little bit. Deductions on medical expenses that exceed 7.5% of your income, and that's down from 10%. But the most important thing I think here is to say that these are temporary cuts for consumers, right, for individual and joint filers. They're set to expire right now at the end of 2025. So again, who knows what happens between now and 2025? This could get extended, but as now, these are temporary cuts. Now, if you look at the corporate tax cuts, this is a pretty big deal, right? So the corporate tax rate in the U.S. is dropping by 40%, from 35% down to 21%. There is a one-time grace period for companies to repatriate their foreign cash reserves. That rate could be as low as 8%. You've seen some announcements here over the last few weeks of companies making announcements that they're going to repatriate some of their cash. And what you'll probably see is over the next year or so, is whenever that grace period is, you'll see one-time hits on financials to accommodate for the repatriation of that cash. So the idea is that as those companies repatriate that cash, they will invest it here in the U.S. So we've seen, again, a few announcements over the last few weeks. We'll be curious to see what we see over the coming months and years as a result of this. But the important takeaway here is that these tax cuts are permanent for corporations. Right? So that's a big difference between the individual and corporate piece of it. If you think about what this relates to specifically for things like auto sales, it's kind of up and down, right? Because we talked about the increased interest rates. Those are largely going to offset any of the tax benefits that regular consumers are going to see if they try to go buy a vehicle, right? So you might get a little bit extra back in your tax return, but your monthly car payment's likely going to be a bit higher. So, that's kind of a wash if you think about it from that perspective. But I think the bigger impact potentially here from a U.S. perspective is the investment that could be made within the U.S. Okay, NAFTA. So obviously this is going to be a topic throughout the next 2 days. So I think the rest of the panels have done a very nice job sort of setting up the discussion. I just want to level set with a few statistics of my own. What you see here, this is historical imports, U.S. imports by country of origin. So you've got Mexico on the bottom there, and then Canada, Japan, South Korea, Germany, and then other. So the latest data that we have available from trade.gov is through September 2017. So through September of last year, Mexican imports were up 13.2%. So we're looking to come in somewhere around 2.4, 2.5 million units for the year ending 2017. That's a pretty big number, right? And it's increased every year over the last 5 or 6 years. So it's estimated that 2/3 of that of Mexico's light vehicle assembly, again, that varies a little bit from what Amelia had to say, but I think that also included commercial vehicles. But specifically on the light vehicle side, 2/3 of light vehicle production in Mexico is exported to the U.S. So we wanted to do a little bit of an analysis and look at, and part of this is mainly, some of it's due to NAFTA, some of it's due to the tax reform legislation we talked about. You're starting to see companies hedge their bets a little bit because nobody's really sure where NAFTA is going to end up at. So there's a lot of scenario planning that's going on within OEMs and suppliers. But by our analysis, at least over the last 12 months, based on announcements that companies have made, the number of vehicles is approximately 350,000 that were previously produced in Mexico or announced to be produced in Mexico that have now shifted to the U.S. So, as this uncertainty continues, we would expect to see those announcements continue. 350,000 is a big number, right? That's an automotive assembly plant. That's $1 to $2 billion worth of investment. So I'm not up here to say, what I think the outcome will be. I think it's anybody's guess at this point. But just know that, there's a lot of planning going on behind the scenes as this continues to drag out. I think the uncertainty continues, and you're looking at, companies trying to hedge their bets a little bit. One interesting note on here, if you look at who's up and who's down, companies like Germany, for example, imports are down. Some of that is due to localization. Same goes with Japan. Some of that has to do with the products that they're importing. Of note here, through September 2017, imports from China totaled around 40,000 units. That's double from that same time in 2016. So again, we talked about further localization of product from China. That's going to continue as well. Again, particularly if you think about the trends that we're seeing in the U.S. and Canada, waning demand for passenger cars, more and more of those products will be imported from China. All right, so let's take a quick look at at the outlook from a sales perspective. So the chart on the left is our U.S. sales outlook out to 2024. For 2018, we're forecasting a further decline down to 16.8 million units. And this is a pretty stable level, though, right? I mean, we're showing a bottoming out around 15.9, 16 million units in 2021. These are still really good levels, right? These are still highly profitable levels for the industry. And then we have it ticking back up towards 17 million units in the out year. So some good news on that front. From a Canadian perspective, again, record sales last year, 2 million units. They are tied pretty closely with the U.S. in terms of the economic terms. So we're seeing a slowdown for them as well. Mexico, as I mentioned, down slightly last year. We're predicting a further decline in 2018. What's interesting is, despite the uncertainty around NAFTA and the impact that will have on Mexico, the GDP outlook for Mexico is still pretty strong for the next 3 to 5 years. You know, that's any potential loss on the auto side is offset by other manufacturing investments to the market. So we actually see growth beyond 2018 for Mexico from a sales perspective, up to 1.8 million units in 2024. So from an assembly outlook, so what's sort of the net impact here? As I mentioned, the U.S. has received a lot of favorable announcements here over the last year or so, both in terms of a shift of assembly from Mexico to U.S., but also new investments as well. So we're forecasting them to hit around 13 million units by the end of our forecast window. Canada, we've long said, because of the relatively high labor costs and the uncertainty of that market, and really the desire of some companies to move that assembly south, be that the U.S. or down into Mexico, their assembly footprint will continue to decline. So you can see last year they produced around 2 million units. We're predicting that to decline down to 1.7 million units. And then finally, Mexico, again, and I think Andreas had a good stat on his slides that showed all the recent investments going on in Mexico. So between the plants that have recently opened that are still ramping up, and the at least 2 plants that we know of that have been announced that are scheduled to open here over the next 12 to 18 months, we see very strong growth from Mexico in terms of assembly. This doesn't even include, the 3 or 4 Chinese OEMs that are in various stages of exploring options to potentially add capacity or add an assembly plant to Mexico. So we're actually forecasting Mexico to hit 4.5 million units by the end of our forecast window. So very strong growth up from the 3.9 million units we see today. So I want to take the last few minutes and just talk a little bit about, as we think about next-gen mobility and what the future holds for our industry. And we're really living in 2 different worlds right now, and I've said this often over the last several months. We have the industry of today, which again is, in North America, seems to be dominated by pickups and crossovers and SUVs. And then we have this industry of tomorrow at some date that nobody's really sure of, right? That's going to have a world dominated by autonomous and connected and ride-sharing and electric vehicles, right? So there's a large divide right now about when that's going to happen and how automakers and suppliers should approach that divide in the industry. I was at CES a few weeks ago in Las Vegas, and it was very interesting. It's easy to walk into the North Hall at the Las Vegas Convention Center for folks that have been there and see what the future is, right? I mean, there's all sorts of, you got passenger drones and fully autonomous vehicles and all sorts of augmented and virtual reality. It's pretty cool stuff, right? But then the first day, it poured rain all day, and there was just absolute congestion in the streets. You couldn't get anywhere. And then the second day, there was a power outage, right? And it's sort of ironic for the world's foremost, consumer electronics show. And then the next week, or this past week in Detroit, again, you had, 80% of the products were pickups and SUVs and the like. So there's 2 very different worlds right now. Our strategy and team put out a piece just a few weeks ago titled, "How to Overcome 5 Myths That Are Distracting Your Auto Company." And so this goes along the lines of, we all agree that at some point in the future, these trends will take hold, but there's still a lot of challenges and opportunities in the industry of today. So I want to go through some of these common myths that the industry has perhaps overprescribed to. The first is that electric vehicle sales will surge within the next few years. Right? So we'll keep this in context. I'm going to show some stats on the next slide, but right now in the U.S., it's less than 1% market share, fully electric vehicles. And it's not much different if you look globally. Second piece is a landscape dominated by fully autonomous vehicles is on the near horizon. Right? And we know that there's plenty of testing going on in that space right now, and there's a lot of exciting things that are being developed. But I think the general consensus is that they're nowhere near full autonomy, which is level 5, which essentially means no steering wheel, no pedals, and out it goes, and you're good to go, right? There's a lot of obstacles to that. And those obstacles include cost, right, compared to traditional combustion engine vehicles, the infrastructure investment needed for that technology to take hold, right? So that's like smart street signs and sensors and vehicle-to-vehicle communication and the like. There's consumer acceptance of that, and then there's obviously the regulatory piece that would help guide that to market. The third is the ride-sharing phenomenon will transform the industry and facilitate the transition to a fully autonomous era. So I'll pause on that slide. The fourth, traditional OEMs and suppliers face an existential threat from new competitors. And from new competitors, we mean the technology companies that we hear so often about from Silicon Valley and other places. And the fifth is that automakers can thwart that competition and bolster their revenues via downstream integration, such as owning ride-sharing businesses or providing connectivity services. So if you look at all the potential revenue opportunities around data and connectivity and those type of services, the idea is that you can get into that business and really propel your profits. And a lot of this comes from pressure from Wall Street, right, and investors that say you're not making enough money. And just to give context, right, in 2016, the top 17 automakers in the world had $120 billion in profits. It's a huge number, right? But if you look at that same statistic, if the top 10 OEMs, the return on invested capital was 6.6%. That's not a big number, particularly when you compare it to some of the technology companies that are making double-digit growth year after year, double-digit profitability. There's a huge gap there, right? So this pressure from investors is to say, why aren't you automakers making the same level of profitability these other companies? You need to change your business. You need to show us that you're willing to change and embrace these next-gen technologies. So there's a lot of pressure to do that, and a lot of companies are, in fact, investing in those technologies. But let's talk a little bit why we don't think it's going to happen, at least in the next 1 to 2 product cycles, which would be the next 5 to 10 years. The first is EVs, and we talked about EV share. We're forecasting, and again, this was published in our digital auto study that came out last fall, that by 2027, EV share in the US will be under 4%, right? Mainly because of cost, and we talk about cost per kilowatt hour, and we think that $100 per kilowatt hour is sort of that magic number. We don't think the entire industry will get there probably for another decade or so. And you're still making improvements to the internal combustion engine during that period, right? So it's not just a static environment that you're working in. That could change, particularly in Europe and China, if you think about the regulatory environment and the considerations to ban combustion engine vehicles in those markets. So outside of the US, that very much could accelerate, and we could see a higher penetration rate sooner. The next piece is miles driven, and so this gets into the ride-sharing and car-sharing discussion. And certainly the ride-sharing companies and car-sharing companies, they're gaining traction, right? People are using them more and more every single day. But just to put it in context here, in 2016, 96% of the miles driven in the U.S. were personal miles. The other 4% were, taxis and ride-sharing and car-sharing and the like. And of that 4%, only 0.3% were from ride-sharing, car-sharing miles. So we've got a long way to go. And on the profitability front here, the cost per mile is still prohibitive compared to owning a vehicle, all right? And not just a new vehicle, but if you have a used vehicle, obviously your total operating costs are going to get a little bit lower. So there's still a long way to go before this is profitable and really takes off. It's a convenient thing right now, but it's still not cost affordable for mainstream consumers. Another piece is we talked about the autonomous vehicle penetration. So if we think about what's required for level 5 penetration, which is fully autonomous, no geofencing or anything like that, there are significant hurdles to overcome on this. And I just rattled off the main components of that. So really, we think that in 2027, we'll probably have around 1% of the US market will be level 5. The vast majority of that 8% comes from level 4, which again is geofencing, a defined area that you can have high-def mapping and LiDAR for. It's a little bit easier, less variables, let's say, right, to conquer, to bring those vehicles to market. At some point, there will be a tipping point, and we do think that's somewhere between 2025 and 2030 where these things could really take off. Point being, there's a lot of opportunity and a lot of things happening between now and 2025, 2030, right? There's a lot of money on the table. There's a lot of opportunity on the table. And so what we said is, it's important to focus on these things, but let's not take your eye off the prize in the industry of today. So here's some things that, as an industry, we can focus on today. The first is make your own fact-based forecast of the industry and where your company fits in it, right? So not only today, but 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 20, 30 years from now, right? There's been a lot of, we call it hype, right, around autonomous and connected, and that's fine. There are significant dollars being invested in that technology today, but build your assumptions from the ground up, right? Don't take, overly stated goals or projections and bake those into your forecast. You need to take that all with a grain of salt. The second piece is make smart investment decisions. So there's still an opportunity for technologies of today to be invested in, to improve on, to make more money on. You don't want to overextend yourself by making acquisitions that might not pay off for a very long period of time. And that's what a lot of the next-gen mobility solutions are, right? It's a very long ROI. And investors want to see that ROI today. Manage costs zealously, right? So we still think that there's plenty of opportunity to improve costs in the current landscape. We have a process called Fit for Growth that we help companies with to help define their business, look at their different business units and say, okay, are there areas that you'd like to divest in, right, based on what the outlook is or the profitability of a certain business unit? Are there other areas that you want to invest in, right? So we do a holistic look at everybody's portfolio and help them with those types of decisions. The next is don't do it all yourself, and I've said this time and time again, right? Strategic partnerships are key as you think about next-gen technologies, right? And especially hedging your bets. We don't know what technology is going to dominate the landscape in 15 or 20 years. So it's important to have those strategic partnerships to offset some of those costs, and again, to hedge your bets so that you don't wind up all in on technology that might not ultimately come to fruition. And lastly, adapt your corporate culture, operating model, talent pool to navigate current and future changes in the industry. And you've seen this, you've actually seen some companies split, right? One side manages the industry of today, one side manages the industry of tomorrow. There's a number of cautionary tales out there where traditional OEMs and suppliers have purchased some of these technology companies and tried to put them into their existing corporate culture, and it just didn't take. Innovation was stifled in some cases. So it's important to embrace that culture of some of those new technology companies, let them build, and let them adapt to your corporate culture in time, right? You can find a lot of synergies, you can find a lot of improvements to take from some of these companies that are a little less siloed, I would say, than some of those in the auto industry. So something to think about. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that. Unfortunately, we haven't got time for questions now, but you've got the whole 2 days, think tanks, coffee breaks, lunches, to catch up and ask questions directly to the people or just be part of the bigger discussion. What I will do quickly, just before we go to the break, is to share the results of the voting survey we did earlier about what the company's outlook was for your business, for logistics operations and your budgets. So it seems the top answer is you expect investment to increase somewhat. So it's good. It's not huge growth, but growth nonetheless. Definitely very positive, and there was no expectations to decrease. So that's good news. I think it's good news. But thank you very much to this panel for starting the conference off in a great way. Thank you very much. Because we've overrun a little bit, overrun quite a bit, we're starting the next session at 11:15 to give you a chance to go and get some coffee, have some buns or donuts, whatever they've got out there, and to visit the stands. One of the exhibits is actually outside the hotel. There's a covered car, which is being brought here by a company called Cover Car. So if you want to see that, see how that works, please, it's just outside the front door. But otherwise, we'll see you back here at 11:15. Thank you.